taking his place just to save time. Right. Okay, good morning everybody. While we wait for others and while we wait also for Abhishek, I will make a few announcements which he might, come and say yes or no because it was his suggestion. He suggests that we today again we combine the two sessions, meaning with a very short break, so that we are done by lunchtime by 1, and we have the valedictory till lunch. Okay. Now, and the other thing, not everyone's here today, right? The other thing is that for the valedictories, thankfully I don't have to speak a word, but we want a few of the participants to come up with their observations, let's say. So the ones who want to speak, he will come and tell you who wants to just prepare, say something mentally, very brief, but something that will be good if it's like there's a good distribution so that we get different kinds of experience. So these are the two things that he suggested. So if you agree, we will do that. Maybe you should wait a few more minutes. No, who else is coming? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Maybe it's last
5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's also a Saturday. Yeah. So I have to wait for Abhishek to show up. I think. Yes, yes. Who else is meant to come apart from Abhishek? Maybe Smriti will not even come because her daughter had a fall yesterday and all that. She told me, and it's a Saturday. I was surprised that we have the course till Saturday. So should we start or what do you think? Pallavi has left. So, Shomjyoti will come with Abhishek. So I guess. Oh, Pratik and Chotam. I didn't see them today at all, but I went down for breakfast late. So I don't know. Because
Pratik doesn't come for
breakfast, yes. So I didn't see them at all today. And the other guy from Bangladesh, Rimon, has also gone off twice. So maybe we should start, I think. No?
Yeah.
Because Abhishek has a lot of work to do. He said he had to take printouts and stuff, so maybe that's why he's also doing that. I don't know why. Okay. So this is actually sad because we thought that we'd have the most, the the essays that bring together the discussions in a powerful way would come on the last session, but now we have several participants missing. So if we thought, if some people felt that it was all about thinking of religion as negative or bad, it's not about that at all. No, I'm not referring to you. I'm saying in general there was idea of what is religion? Why aren't we discussing religion and going around it? I'm not referring to you at all. I'm saying the readings can raise that, But my idea, as I said, was to first plant those questions, right? To push you to think and then later link it with my own work to show that, even if something seems very distant, as if something related to the West and how it has tremendous significance in our own lives and what we think of. No, not because. So secular, religion and secular, the point is these notions, as I said, have acquired tremendous significance of their own. We cannot, negate that. And the point is we are also having all kinds of problems and also permutations and combinations, or what we think are negations of this separation. Which is why very important scholars and thinkers are now thinking, how can we reconsider, reflect, and rework? Let's get something clear, and that's what Bilrami is pointing to. He said, this does not mean, the critique of the secular doesn't mean that we get rid of what was earlier, church or some form of religious domain completely. Yeah. So that we have to keep in mind. None of them is saying that we completely do away with the notion that the religion in some form and the state should not be kept separate in several policy matters of the state. That no one is saying that let's do away with that completely. Now, where we have complications in the actual workings of this principle of separating the state from religion, that is what they're reflecting on by learning from experience. And Talal Asad was important in pointing to the fact as to how this idea or the necessity of separating the church from the state arose in certain European societies at a particular moment of time. So what we are now reflecting on is that, what are the new questions that the working out of these principles in different societies have thrown up. And they have thrown up many, many, many important questions arising out of the complexities and the pluralities and the heterogeneities. But much more than that, in the way, as I said, this idea has been perceived, appropriated by different groups and worked in different societies in their own ways. Which is why, when Ashish Nandi says that, Abhishek told me yesterday, you disabused me of Ashish Nandi, I'm such a great fan of Ashish Nandi. I said, yes, he told me that. I mean, he called me Nailal, so I was sure that he would be a great admirer of Ashish Nandi. But that's not the point. I said, no, it's not about disabusing. It's pointing to the pitfalls in a position which is important to argue for. But, again, the problem with Ashish Nandi's binary is that he's not looking at the historicity of these processes. The historicization is what all these thinkers are speaking of. Because the historicization is extremely important, because the problems or the challenges that have come up have actually come up in the way this idea of separating state policy and some form of religion or faith has been understood, taken over, but not just understood, taken over, but implemented in different societies in very different ways. Right? So we are now faced with all these problems because of the complexities in the actual workings of them. Which is why it's so important to pay attention to the contingent processes that give meaning, particular meaning, particular significance to this very general idea, and which is why we're saying, do universals work or don't universals work? Okay, but that does not mean that we do away with these universals, the earlier universals, because we thought they were essentialized and they do not work precisely because they do not pay attention to the particular context and the particular contingency of the processes in very many different societies. Now, having said that, more and more the disciplines are also coming back to a notion of the global. And I've had this debate with Walter Mignolo, one of the theorists of, as you know, decolonial. I said, so what is the difference? You get rid of the universal. We all say they are essential, they are racial, they are objectified, etc., and they do not work. And of course, they have a normative baggage. What is the problem with these universals, which we often forget? They have a normative baggage. As I said, there's the idea of superior, inferior, or more elevated and less elevated. So as I said, it's not just, religion is being questioned. What is being questioned is the idea of that we know what religion is and we know what the secular is, and that, based on that premise, we try and separate, the church from the state. That is what we have tried to look at. So how do we arrive at what we think is a universal conception of religion, and how do we arrive at a universal conception of the secular? And both have several pitfalls, as I said, because they tend to be universal in the sense of transcultural, ahistorical, and unchanging, whereas they constantly change, and not just constantly change. As I said, they're giving particular meanings and significance in particular societies, in very depending on the surrounding circumstances of that society. So today, what Talal Asad would be pointing to, but before that, I will like to go into Taylor. So hence, as I said, it's actually the challenges thrown by the workings of some vague notion of separation of state and or politics and religion or faith. The challenges that have been thrown up by the workings of this notion, very vague notion, in different societies, that is making us think, reflect, reconsider. Okay, so one important point, as I said, of going beyond the universal and trying to make disciplines global, you would know, global sociology has become a very important kind of idea now, even more than global history, although we do have ideas of global history, but in history we speak more of connected histories and shared histories rather than global, but there is a trend. But sociology, there is a very clear idea of global sociology. How? The idea is we pay attention to all these particular different contingent processes, and yet we concentrate on the common concerns, common worries. And one of the common concerns is, why is it that what secular, at a point of time in certain societies of Europe was so necessary, is not working at all at other moments. One reason is easy, which Talal Asad says, that you apply that universal standard to societies that never went through that process of the fight between the church and state, or where the religious and the secular were combined in different ways. And Bill Graham and many others are pointing to the fact that we have to reconsider the premises from which we start. Which is why Bill Graham's point for me is so important. He's saying, rather than thinking that they are separate and they work or do not work and work in faulty ways, he's saying, let's start on the premise that they are inseparable, and yet try and arrive at an idea of the secular where we think that the state policies or religion or faith in some way should not come in or interfere with the actual working of state policies or formulation of state policies in very important aspects of life. So what I was trying to say is that none of these people are saying that we give up the secular completely. We give up the secular in the sense that they cannot be separated and hence forget it, and let's have religion in whatever sense interfere in state policies everywhere. No one is saying that. What they are saying is precisely we have to rethink religion and we have to rethink the secular, because as I said, the working out of this very vague notion in different societies have thrown up very serious challenges, and they've also produced reactions. No? So all this rethinking is premised on that. In that sense, we should not think that it's something abstract theorizing. All these people are reacting to actual challenges that various societies are facing in different parts of the world. But having said that, something Chandra Mahanti had said years ago in Feminism Without Borders, yes, we pay attention to the particularities. She's the one who would question the notion of the construction of a third world woman very powerfully when she was a student. Okay, so she says that was the first task of let's say, what's the word? Deconstruction, but deconstruct in order to learn anew. Saying deconstruct that way is the easier task. You can criticize, you can dismiss, but to learn anew is the much more difficult task, and that's what we're trying to do. That's why I'm saying that it's not. There's no point in saying religion doesn't work and our idea of the religious is a construction. Which is why, as I said, I find Bill Graham's notion so powerful that constructions are not just up in the air. Constructions also have their basis in particular mindsets, in particular attitudes, in particular dispositions, which Clifford Geertz is talking about. And it's only when they are based in something is that they can get fused into the polity so easily. Right? So that's the notion. So Chandra Mahanti therefore had said that the second task of building anew on premises that pay attention to this difference, plurality, heterogeneity, different circumstances, different locations, different situations, everything, does not mean that it takes away from the common concerns. And she says that the common concerns are not just several, more than that, they are terribly important. And which is why the first world, third world, she says, doesn't work. When she revisits under Western eyes after 16 years, she says conditions of the world have changed in ways that the third world, first world does not have the same kind of balance that it had when she wrote, when people spoke of third world nationalism and the third world. It's very much related to, as you know, the Cold War phase also. The two worlds, and then so, which is why she's speaking of what? She says if we think in terms of the haves and the have-nots, we will see that 1/3 of the society, just 1/3 or less than 1/3 would form the haves, and 2/3 of this huge world will form the have-nots. So it's not as if, despite huge differences, as I said, heterogeneity of everything you can think of, we cannot have common concerns. Common concerns are those of deprivation of different kinds, of poverty, of health, etc., etc. So that is the challenge, and hence people are thinking of making the disciplines truly global in that sense, where we do not start from one premise of of a notion and then we see if it applies equally in different parts of the world. Where we start from the premise that conditions are different, not just start from the premise that conditions are different. We recognize and we respect those, pay attention to and recognize and respect those differences, and yet try and see how you can have common concerns, common ideas that help us. What is the point? Point is to actually, in our own ways, we all try and cope with, deal with, very real problems that affect us in some way or the other, right? For example, starvation, hunger, really affects me. Maybe it doesn't affect everyone the same way, right? But it does affect me. The way consumption and greed, the way the world is being pushed by greed and consumption. At times I just feel like what is happening to all of us. We just don't care. It's like it's almost become that poverty is the problem of the poor. So I'm saying that it may not affect all of you the same way, but the point is it's not as if there are no common challenges that faces the humanity at large. Environment, of course, we can bring it up. You don't even know how long it is. So it can be anything, but there are concerns that can, bring again disciplines together in a global manner in a very different. So starting from the premise that this happened somewhere and we applied it universally, we say things are happening differently in different parts of the world, and yet recognizing those, we can still come. So to come back to Taylor, therefore. So Taylor, when Charles Taylor, and thanks to Abhishek because he suggested this reading, I didn't know of it, as to why we need a radical redefinition of secularism. As I said, now no one is giving up the notion of the secular completely. No one is saying let's drop it completely. They're saying we have to rethink, based on the challenges that the world has faced, in the working out of this very vague notion over a very long period of time. But my problem with Ashish Nandi is also that, although he's saying that it has lost its what? It has lost its credibility. That's what he's saying. Very clearly that it did work. He's saying, I'm not saying that it didn't work at any point of time, but now it is past its time. Doesn't work. We say the same thing about nationalism. The point is, would that make it disappear? So, it wouldn't make it disappear, right? Neither nationalism in some form or the other, nor this idea of the secular, which is why the challenge is to rethink, as I said, basing ourselves on the actual challenges that the working out has faced. So he's saying that Taylor, that ethnocentricity relates to the notion that democracies have to be secular, something like that I had said, which Balibar also says, that how do we combine the notion of the cosmopolitan and the secular, etc., etc. These are premises which have come to be questioned, but the point is, why were they thought of in the first place? And in the same way, we also have to ask that. So he's saying this: the relation with the notion that democracies have to be secular, something that Talal Asad had also said, that the moment you say that democracies are naturally, necessarily secular, you rule out the possibility that religious democracies can also be democratic. And that's the common fallacy we all fall into, all of us. The moment we say a state is a religious state, what are our assumptions? Terrible, that is like, it's absolutely bad and has to be done away with at all costs. But the fact is, one, we do not think of the possibility that it can be democratic. And if you pay attention to these readings, that's what they're saying, rather than the secular, welcome to Talal Asad, just take them as concepts. Think of the processes that actually make them real. So, what I said yesterday, that if we think of democracy, if we look at the process of democratization, and the notion of giving political powers to groups that were unrepresented or discriminated against, it has worked. With all its pitfalls, it has worked. Just in the sense of the democratization of representation of, let's say, the disprivileged groups in politics. So that's what they're trying to say, that we have to pay attention to the processes, and it's precisely in the particular processes of particular societies that we face those challenges. And hence, there's an urgent need to reconsider the basic premises on which these were formulated. But that doesn't mean, as I said, no one's saying that this is terrible and let's do away with it. So separation of church and state, and so he says that this notion of the democracies have to be secular, therefore suffers from an ethnocentricity, which we understand. Because as Talal Asad says, what happens to societies that never went through that process, that terrible process of, let's say, religious wars, etc., 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 and they never felt the need of separating the church from the state the way these few West European societies felt the need. Right? So that's the ethnocentrism. So separation of church and state, and also neutrality or principal distance, which is what the Indian state has adopted. He says they have, the objective is three common goods, however you frame it. The three common goods are: no one must be forced in the domain of religious or basic belief. No one should be forced in that. The second common good is there must be equality between people of different faiths. So you see, that's why I said that Paxatanji says the idea that the Indian secularism is different is a failed debate, because you say we are very particular, we are different. different. No, the notion of principled distance and the separation of church and state, which has been questioned, they have common goals, common ends in view. So the first one, as I said, no one must be forced in the domain of religion or basic belief. There must be equality between people of different faiths. And the third one, all spiritual families must be heard, including in the ongoing process of determining what the society is about, political identity. And finally, of course, this is Taylor's addition, that also the relationship between community and harmony, but fraternity. So he's saying, according to Taylor, that one of our basic difficulties is that we have the wrong model of secularism, and which has a continuing hold on our minds. We think of secularism or laicity as, and any French person you talk to, they would say it immediately that our laicity is very different from secularism. Okay, so he's saying the problem is that we have a very wrong model of secularism, which has a continuing hold on our minds. We think of secularism or laicity has to do with the relation of state and religion. Why is it a wrong condition? Because it takes away from the goals with which let's say these concepts, these principles were framed. The goals are the same. So if we just harp on the separation of state and religion, we'll see that it doesn't work. Everyone knows it doesn't work, right? So, so we have, but there's a continuing hold on, it has a continuing hold on our minds. We think of secularism or laicity has to do with the relationship of state and religion, whereas in fact it has to do with the correct response of the democratic state to diversity. That is why he thinks we have to reconsider. If we look at the three goals that I mentioned, that no one must be forced, that there must be equality between people of different faiths, and all spiritual families must be heard of, including in the ongoing process of determining what the society is about, or the political identity. If we look at the three goals, protecting people in their belonging, faith or protecting people in their belonging, treating people equally and giving them all a hearing, right? There is nothing to single out, the religion as against non-religion, right? Or ethics or morality. It's like all of them have the same kind of objective. So you cannot say, no, religion is terrible and to be discarded. If we look at the goals on which the idea of the secular was based. So there is nothing to single out religion as against non-religion, secular or atheist. Simply. Now, the idea that secularism makes a special case of religion arises from the history of its coming to be in the West, something that Talal Asad is pointing out again and again. Right? As I said, it was a particular condition of a few Western European societies at that moment that the separation of the church and the state became absolutely urgent and important. Okay. And we will come to Talal Asad, not the one I've given. In another one, he's speaking also of the genealogy of the secular. And he makes a very important distinction between the secular as an episteme and secularism as an ideology. Okay, so we'll be in the next reading, when we come to that, I'd like you to think about it. Okay. So, the idea that secularism makes a special case of religion arises from the history of its coming into to be in the West. The word secularism didn't appear in the early phases of American public life, and there have been works that show that the secular, actually, when it appears, does not have a very positive sense. It was to mark out the worldly clergy from the ones who lived in monastic seclusion. And the idea was that the ones who lived in monastic seclusion were somehow superior. Our same idea of the ascetic who sits and meditates somewhere else versus the people, the clergy who move around, or the saints or whoever who move around in the world, talking to people. So he's saying, just see how the notion has changed. The idea of the secular, or secularization, also the process has changed the meaning over time. So the word secularism did appear in the early phases of American public life, and he gives example of that, and the president quotes on that. I will not go into the details. Laicity in France came about in a struggle against a powerful church. Okay, the strong temptation, right, for the state was for the state itself to stand on a moral basis independent from religion. Think of Oberon, you know. Laicity in France came about on account of a very powerful, of struggle against a very powerful church, and the the need of the state to stand on its own. As he says that once Reformation and Zwingli makes this distinction between the three parts of human reason, then man is apparently between the inward and the outward, etc., external, internal communion versus your activities in the world. Apparently, man and science everything left free to act right on their own without the fear of God. So just think of the connections between the readings there. So laicity therefore came to France from this. The strong temptation was for the state itself to stand on a moral basis independent from religion. And again we go back to the question of how do we define religion, right? So now scholars are saying more and more that the secular often constructs the religious. Right? You need, just as the Occident needed the Orient to represent or represent itself, the secular continuously constructs the religious. So morality of the state, moreover, not just the state wanted to stand on its own with its own morality of the state was thought to be superior and independent of all religions. All religions. Right? So you've already gone through a process of defining what religion is. Yeah. So basis of morality therefore now becomes liberty in the French case. Because the state is not just the state that stands above all religion, everyone therefore is free to act according to his or her free will. Think of how easily we use the word individual choice in any controversy that comes up with regard to anything. Wearing of the veil is a very common case, but how we speak of whether they have free will, free choice, free decision. See how these ideas have come down to us in very, very, very powerful ways. We'll come to that with Balibar. Okay. So if we move beyond such originating contexts and look at the societies we live in today, the first feature that strikes us is the wide diversity not only of religious views, but also of those that involve no religion, not to speak of those that are unclassifiable in this dichotomy. So what he's saying, therefore, is the move is from that we have forgotten to move out of the basic, the originating moment in which, this idea of separation became important in certain societies, and not paid attention, as I said again and again, not paid attention to how these ideas have been worked out in different societies over time. And hence he thinks that with this fixation upon the originating moment or institutional process, we have lost sight of the common goals. And if we paid attention to the common goals, we will, come up with a totally different or radically different rethinking of the secular. So if we move beyond such originating context and look at the societies we live in today, the first feature that strikes us is the wide diversity not only of religion and non-religion, right, but also of those that involve no religion. And think of this, in terms of biology. There are people, more and more people, who say we do not want to be classified as male or female, right? In terms of gender, in that sense. And they are also precisely raising these kinds of questions, throwing up in a different context. What we do not conform to the set classifications. So so there's not just religion, non-religion. There are also those which cannot be classified as religion in any sense. Okay. So reasons 1, 2, and 3, therefore, the goals, require that we treat even-handedly all of them. If we say that we give them chance. Can the AC be turned down a bit? I think everyone's sneezing. Right. So, sorry to go back. So, reasons 1, 2, and 3 require that we not pay equal attention. We treat them with equal respect. But the ideal tendency is to dismiss or criticize, not just dismiss, it's to criticize. Because it like challenges our set ways of thinking. So fixation on religion, therefore, is complex and amounts to a fetishization of the favored institutional arrangements at some originating moment, in some society. And we have to move away from that. The one should start from the goals and derive the concrete arrangements from these goals. And so think of Bill Ramy now. If we start on the premise that religion and politics are inseparable, let's say institutionally, and then arrive at a different notion of the secular, which pays attention to the goals of paying equal respect, of hearing everybody equally, even in the process of the construction of the polity, the social polity that we are thinking of. This would be very important for you, Himani. Think about these things because the religious, secular, the public, private.
The way he describes the non-religious, would that work with the Indian scenario? Like when he says that people can't be just qualified, don't want to fall into religion. Does that kind of a category, could that exist? I'm just thinking, could that exist for an Indian society?
It could actually. It could, but we have probably lost, in thinking of religions for people for such a long time. Yes. So one should start from the goals and derive the concrete arrangements from the goals, and not stay with the originating or originary institutional arrangements, which, as we have said again and again, were very particular, very context specific, and very, very, it happened to very few societies in this entire world, right? So now I think you are understanding when I say that that secularism is an imposed idea, does not work for me and for many others. That's it. So the same goes for the neutrality of public institutions. What is needed is a recognition of the plurality of principles at stake. When I say that we start on the premise of plurality and heterogeneity, and then try and arrive at a consensus based on common goals. So, state morality, on the other hand, is this idea of strong collective identity of people. I'll come to that soon. So, a modern democratic state demands a people. This is very important for us. It's absolutely pertinent for us now. A modern democratic state demands a people with a strong collective identity. And what he says there, that the morality of the state that stands above religion and superior to religion becomes very important. And you want the people, just as the nation demands your total loyalty. If you think you belong to the nation, it demands your complete loyalty. There are always rival and competing ways of identification and identifying. But the problem or what causes tensions is that the nation demands your absolute loyalty as the legitimate form of politically imagining a nation. The state, therefore, he says, needs a people. As you know, we can't think of, majority, call it whatever, consensus, but a people. States needs a people with a strong collective identity. Democracy obliges us to show much more solidarity and much more commitment to one another in our joint political process than was demanded by the hierarchical and authoritarian societies of yesteryear. We forget. These are the extremely, what should I say, constraining powers of democracy, which we do not take into account because we believe in the ideal of the democratic. We shouldn't forget that too. So, the state, this idea of the collective to which you owe morality, demands that you show solidarity in different ways. And I'll give you an example with the notion of the citizen. It can be applied, I mean, I don't know the other societies. India, we call them what we say. Indians, Indian Muslims, Indian Christians, Indians, now we don't say Indian Sikhs, but who are the Indians, right? All model of citizenship in all democratic societies has an ideal, notion of the ideal citizen. In India, I think it's a little better than the US. Why? If you go to the US, African Americans, Native Americans, Latin Americans. So the diversity is first, so none of them are truly Americans. I don't know which is good or which is bad. In India, the idea, the Indian identity is first, and yet you then mark out. Do we say Indian Hindus? So who are these, what is the idea of the citizen functioning behind us? So when we say that the state demands a public and not just a people, it demands the people to show solidarity, not just solidarity, conformity in various ways. And this, if we forget that, that is when, heterogeneity creates a real problem. Otherwise, it should not cause trouble. So the hierarchical authoritarian societies of yesteryear, we think of the feudal, the medieval, the monarch. I'm not saying they were good, but saying they did not demand this kind of solidarity, because the very idea of democracy or the republic is that we the people. Think of it, we the people, and who constitutes this people and how. Very, very important. So thinkers in this, yes, the democracy obliges us to show much more solidarity and much more commitment to one another in our joint political project than was demanded by the hierarchical or authoritarian societies of yesteryear. This necessitates a deliberative unit, but it also, kind of constrains us in several ways. The need to conform, as I said, or need to say that we belong in very particular ideals set by, some state, some powerful state. Okay. Thinkers in the civic humanist tradition, from Aristotle to Arndt, I will not go that, have noted this requirement for free societies. They are thinking that, how free, therefore, are we in what we think are free societies. I'll not go into that. They also require a high level of mutual trust. This, I think, is very important. And what we are losing, we say we are losing respect, we are losing this mutual trust. This suspicion and fear of the other precisely arises out of the fact that we have lost, not just losing, we have unfortunately lost this mutual trust. And and if you think of respect, respect is absolutely poised on trust. And that is where the commitment and the loyalty that both the state and the nation, acting separately and together, demands of you, comes under tension, comes into a terrible tension. It can be a very creative tension, pushing us to think in newer ways of conceiving the people, but unfortunately, in most cases, it leads to violence, to construction of frontiers, to this creation of the we and the them, the other. It's not just nations need a stable state, but states need the nation to remain viable. Something I've said, that the states often draw upon this idea of the imagined community in order to be viable, because the other studies, something I've mentioned, have pointed to how violence is an inherent part of the functioning of any modern state. Violence in different senses. The violence, as I said, the violence on us that we have to conform, we have to belong in particular ways and not in other ways, or even not belong. Right? That's the idea of the no religious, right? Not belong. What if we do not want to belong to this particular imagined community? Creates huge problems, as you can see, an immediate turn to what? Intolerance and aggression and violence. Because we are not willing to listen to the voices that say we do not belong on, we do not think we belong on these, and that, grounds, right? So, in this context, certain historical institutional arrangements can appear to be untouchable. See, the totally different idea of the untouchable I was mentioning yesterday. Laicity, for instance. The point is precisely that since both the state and the nation function together, but they both want complete and absolute loyalty, then you think the notion of the secular or the notion of the laicity has to be saved and safeguarded at any cost. The original institutional arrangement, and you forget, the objectives which are much more important for this original institutional arrangement. So this is the radical rethinking of the secular that Taylor is asking us to think of. So the irony is that in the face of modern politics of multicultural identity, this insistence of the crucial feature, in France on identity, this crucial feature of identity that, no kind of religion should come into the public sphere. With, Balibar talks about it. Joan Scott has a book called The Politics of the Veil, extremely powerful book, but then we'll come to that in the second session. So this, the irony is that in the face of a modern politics of multicultural identity, this insistence of the crucial feature falls short of rethinking and redefining historical identities, which may be far-reaching and painful. As I said, what he's saying that we just focus on the original institutional identity. We also say, even many of our friends, but the secular has to be saved at any cost. What is this notion of secular, right? And that's what he's saying. That if we insist on some originating moment and say this has to be saved, we completely lose sight of the goals. If we focus on the goals, then it will the goals will enable a radical rethinking of the secular without generating tremendous violence, tremendous intolerance, tremendous whatever, anxiety. Anxiety is very, very important. And then he goes into Habermas. I think if anyone wants to speak on Habermas and the public sphere, we have mentioned the people. Otherwise, I'll try and move on to. You want to speak more about Taylor, or should I move on to Malala Yousafzai? Or if you have comments or observations. Yes? If we can, yeah. What? Abhishek, this was your suggested reading. Thank you. So, if you can contradict, supplement, question. So, so he is again going into the. Actually, if you read this entire book, the good thing is that he's uploaded the entire book, and there's a very interesting conversation between Taylor and Habermas precisely on the notion of the political and the public and the collective, etc., etc. So I think I will probably move from leave aside the rest of my notes and turn to Malala Yousafzai, because I think I have pointed to his most important arguments of why we need a radical rethinking of religion. So now to come back to Malala Yousafzai, as I said, he is speaking of in a different article. He's speaking of the sphere, that we need to make a distinction between the secular as an episteme concept and secularism as an ideology. And he then also points to the idea of the secularization. As I said, these are all processes that actually give meaning and flesh, let's say, to ideas, right? The processes, which is why I said that if we forget the idea of just a pure democracy, which Balibar is talking about, and think of the processes of democratization, we will probably think differently of processes which we think are being terrible even within us. Okay? So, so Talalasa, therefore, secularization thesis, according to him, is both descriptive and normative. It's very important, the normative part, which is why I was pointing to the earlier distinction he makes between secular as an episteme and secularism as an ideology. Right? So he's saying the secularization thesis is both descriptive and normative. Three elements, again, three elements that of that thesis taken to be essential for the development of modernity, at least since the time of Weber. So, and what are these three elements? Structural differentiation of social spaces resulting in the separation of religion from politics. Structural differentiation of social spaces resulting in the separation of religion from politics. Privatization and of religion within its own sphere. And three, the declining social significance of religious belief. And here he is in argument with another influential essay by Jose Casanova, where he writes the book. And according to Casanova, he thinks that secularization has not failed completely. You see, all are reacting to or thinking about the rise, let's say, of what we call religious ideologies, nationalism, fundamentalism in different parts of the world. There are waves. You know, the one wave was in the 1990s, and it's coming back again in different ways. So they're all reacting to, as I said, we shouldn't forget that they're not just sitting and theorizing out of nothing. They are reacting to the challenges being faced by different societies in the moment we are living. So he's saying that Casanova says that of these three, structural differentiation of social spaces resulting in the separation of religion from politics, and the third one, the declining social significance of religious belief, these two are still viable, he says, of the secularization thesis. So response by defenders of the secularization thesis to the emergence of politicized religion. He's saying that that is how they're trying to respond to the emergence of politicized religion. Make it normative. In order for a society to be modern, it has to be secular. We come back to the same problem that it's our fallacy, pitfalls, our ways of thinking that cause the trouble. And in order for a society to be modern, also democratic, it has to be secular. I mean, he raises the question again that can't societies which are not, and maybe Ashish Nandi resonates there, non-modern. He says societies which were non-modern were tolerant and secular in their own ways. Right? But Assad's point, as I said, the moment we think that democracies or modern societies have to be naturally secular, again we rule out the possibility that religious societies, if however we define them, can also be democratic and can also be democratic. And which is why I think Flavia Agnes's work is so important, because she's pointing to how notions of fairness and justice within Islam actually has often given women a much better deal than this much favored uniform code. So political religion can be consistent with modernity, Nandi, as that's right, which I just mentioned, in its modern form, if it becomes public the right way. This is Casanova. So, why did I refer to Nandi? For Nandi, religion as faith is non-modern and good. But politicized religion, not political religion, as ideology is modern and necessarily bad. See the binary there. I know you were agreeing. I disabused you of Nandi a little bit yesterday, but so that's why I'm referring to Nandi here. So political religion, according to Casanova, can be consistent with modernity if it enters the public in the right kind of way. That's Talal Assad's problem with Casanova's thesis. So again, who defines what's the right kind of way in which religion can enter the domain of the public, of the state? Such as, what is the right kind of way to enter the public? Promote public debate around religious values. Also, if the legitimate role of deprivatized religion is carried out effectively, then he says, but if that happens, and he says promote debate around public values, etc., and the legitimate role of deprioritized religion is carried out effectively, then the two elements of the secularization that Jose Casanova says still hold, actually they fail automatically, right? And then there is no separation of privatized religion, and an increasing loss of faith in religion. So, his thesis falls on what he says, just after he says that these two features hold. But more importantly, critics and defenders of the secularization thesis have not paid adequate attention to the concept of the secular, something I said at the beginning, which emerged historically. And you see here the links with Taylor. He says, critics and defenders of the secularization thesis have not paid adequate attention to the concept of the secular, which emerged historically in a particular way and was assigned specific practical tasks. And that's the idea of the object and purpose, etc. Habermas's argument about the central importance of the public sphere for modern liberal democracy does not pay adequate attention, and Taylor would also be making similar arguments, in the notion of the public and notion. So Habermas's argument about the central importance of the public sphere for modern liberal democracy does not pay adequate attention to its exclusions. Think of Uday Singh Mehta here. It will come back with renewed force. So the central importance of the public sphere for modern liberal democracy does not pay adequate attention to its exclusion. Who constitutes the people or the public, and who do know, and how does this, how do the people and the public get constituted? As much through inclusion as through exclusion. And the same thing has been said about nations and nation states. So the experience of religion in the private spaces of home and school is crucial to the formation of subjects who will eventually inhabit a particular public culture. That is also something we forget, because we really think that we can compartmentalize in our reason in such ways that even if I am a believer at home, the moment I leave home, close the door, and step out on the street, that part disappears completely. And what Talal Assad and many others have pointed to, someone was asking me about lawyers, and Rajiv Bhargav says the same thing. It is not just your socialization, it's your social link, your social upbringing, your social conditioning. You cannot say that, yes, you can consciously try and do it, but the residues again becoming. So it's impossible for a man to just step out, close the door, and I've forgotten completely that this has no effect whatsoever on how I think, speak, public. And think of Ashish Nandi's distinctions of the four kinds he thinks, a representative of our leaders. So public sphere, this is an important point. Public sphere is also constituted by sensibilities, memories, and aspirations. Very important. Public sphere is constituted by sensibilities, memories, and aspirations. So, introduction of new discourses. He's saying, how else do new discourses get introduced in the public sphere if they are not molded by sensibilities, memories, and aspirations? And therefore, the introduction of new discourses may result in the disruption of established assumptions. And how is that done? Only through secession or by force. Very important questions for us to ponder. Again, we cannot have easy answers. But we forget, the idea of, it's been said also, not just science as something abstract or even if concrete, but totally detached from all kinds of sensitivity. Same when people have questioned the notion of capitalism as this force which cannot be controlled, as if there's no intention, there's no purpose, there's nothing moving. It's the same thing. It's a totally detached force, which comes and acts on its own. So that these people are pointing to the importance of, sensibility, aspirations, desires, that's would say, in the very molding of the public sphere. So politics therefore can penetrate the personal, accepted by secularists. Then why? So in that, in the same sense, he's saying, if politics, therefore, if secular, the people defenders of the secular or the secularization thesis think that politics can penetrate the personal, why can't they accept the other one, that the religion can penetrate the public? So the other problem is that, not problem, the other important point, and we forget that not just that the public is molded by desires, aspirations, sensibilities of very different kinds, that the public is notoriously diverse. So you cannot impose one unitary moral system on this, extremely diverse public. Think of the laicity of France, in France. State morality above religious morality, but it's an independent morality that gives liberty to everyone. And as Taylor says, that we have insisted on that notion and not paid attention at all to the way, these has been worked out in very different ways, and questions have come up, serious questions have come up, which require us to go back to the goals and see what arrangements which actually, point to the goals, and not insist on this originary institutional arrangement which does not work. So public morality, can be or should be imposed on this public. That is when it becomes not just imposition, it also becomes a what? Like discipline. It also is some kind of violence if you are trying to impose this morality on the public, on a diverse public. So the only option, therefore, religious spokespersons have in a secular situation is to act as secular politicians in a liberal democracy, which is happening everywhere. So it's very difficult to, again, to continue in this vein, it's very difficult to identify a national conscience or a collective moral sensibility. To what does deprivatized religion appeal then? And then he has a section on nationalism, whether it can be understood as religion or not, and I would like you to comment. So we come back to the problems of, Taylor and Assad in that sense are, for me, very, related in very close ways. And Balibar will talk about similar things in a different way in the second session. I mean, we'll discuss that in the second session. But I would like you to react on, because it's become also commonplace, that nationalism is now the new religion of the secular age. And he is actually raising that and reacting to that. So, anyone who's read the reading of today. Anyone? No? Yes, please.
I was thinking about global communities and the diaspora communities, and how we imagine the nation. So, on the one hand, there are talks about multiculturalism, cosmopolitanism. So I was thinking about these global cities and diaspora communities, and then again on the other hand we have this strong search for roots.
Yes.
So I was thinking about Faisal Devji and his comment that how you imagine a nation and its ideology, that you are desiring it at the same time and rejecting it again. So just I wanted to comment on that how is there a proper way of imagining? So how do diaspora communities can imagine, or how do we imagine they imagine a nation?
Exactly. That was the question I had said for the discussion, right? No, I don't know. Is there a proper way? Who defines what the proper way is? Exactly. And that's the coercion, as I said, of we are speaking of. You call it the consensus, you call it the majority, you call it the collective, you know, and collective identity, etc., etc. Yes. Thank you very much. Now, Asad is saying that that there are only structural similarities, maybe in certain ways, you know, the nation is concerned, but again, ends and purposes and their effects are completely different. So he says if we can just look at certain elements initially that they have in common, does not mean that, you know, religion and nationalism are the same. And that, you know, that can be said very easily. You know, do you, if you defer to religion, do you think it'll, let's say, give you protection from the same things that a state or a nation gives you? Not at all. It's very easy. It can be, you know, kind of shown very, very easily that, you know, but he is, that's why, pointing to the differential effects, the differential ends and purposes. So I say just a few elements in common, and you say that, you know, religion and nationalism. I mean, nationalism is the new religion of the state. No, that's what he holds it. And then he's going into the Anglican Church and how it constructs the English society, etc. And the other important thing is he's saying that the social did not exist prior to the 19th century. Very important. So, you know, he's saying you cannot even, you're even speaking of historical processes and contingencies, you cannot draw this correspondence between, you know, religion and nationalism, because the social, in the sense we understand it today, did not exist prior to the 19th century, before the, you know, the concept of the modern state and the modern nation constitutes this, you know, this social, which is the public, you know, in absolutely new ways. I mean, not even new. I mean, we don't know what the notion of the social was prior to that. And these are the questions we have to ask. What was the notion of the social? What was the idea? What were the ideas of belonging? We are so conditioned, you know, by the circumstances of our actual life that we forget to ask those questions. So what we try to do is to impose our own ideas and concerns on those different societies and ages and see if they were good or not. The problem is that we're constantly judging. We're constantly judging. Bless you. What's I miss? Why don't you move away from this, you know? Right. So the social did not exist prior to the 19th century, and yet the emergence of society as an organizable social space made it possible for the state to oversee and facilitate an original task by redefining religion's competence. Very important point here. It is not enough to point to structural analogies between pre-modern theological concepts and those deployed in secular constitutional discourses. And he is referring to Carl Schmitt here, because the practice these concepts facilitate and organize differ widely, and which is also why, you know, you cannot say nationalism is a new religion of the modern social democracies or modern social societies, as I said, because the social, the very idea of the social has been reconceptualized or even created anew by the modern state. And it has been organized also, this idea of the modern state, idea of the secular, idea of the democratic, you know, the private, public, you know, all religious and the secular, as I said, the secular constantly needs to create the religious also. So the secular should not be thought of as a space. And the other problem, why is the idea of the secularism in its faulty sense of separation of religion for politics causing so much trouble? Saying the secular should not be thought of as a space in which real human life gradually emancipates itself from the controlling power of religion. That was the notion brought about by the process of secularization and all this is separation of, you know, religion, just one aspect of, and, you know, nature, science, etc., man's domain where man can act on it. So from there, the total transformation of the idea of the secular has been something that was not you know, not completely, let's say, monastic or yes, of this world, secular as something of this world. As I said, the demarcation of the secular clergy versus the ones who lived in monastic seclusion, where actually the ones who lived in monastic seclusion were thought to be somehow higher. Our notion of the ideal ascetic, think of it, the same thing. It gets transformed over time to mean something where man acquires more and more power and becomes free to act on his own, and hence it becomes an emancipatory concept. The secular is the domain where man therefore reaches his full capacities, his full potential, and full, let's say, possibilities of recognizing himself herself as an individual standing on his own. So I think that is why it's this notion that is causing so much trouble, confusion, tension. So, and that's the problem of the secular as an ideology, because if we hang on to this notion based on these originary moments of very particular societies, you also judge. Right? The moment you say, no, I'm not secular or I'm religious, it's bad. So these are the problems and the imposing natures of any kind of ism. I'll stop there. Sorry. Comments, observations. Please, someone. Yes, please.
He says that religion, it doesn't follow that religion forms nationalism. That's what Assad is saying. But what says like Israel and Pakistan. So, I mean, how do we were discussing earlier about how Pakistan has been the foundation of Pakistan and Israel is based on religion.
It's the ideal of a religion, of a collective identity based on. There's a difference there. That it's calling Pakistan a political idea. There's a subtle distinction, and I don't know. We should bring Assad and Faisal Devji into conversation and see how they react to each other. It would be a very interesting conversation. Yes, I agree. Thank you for pointing to that. But what we are questioning, as I said, are the our notions of religious and the secular.
Even the successful democracy as Great Britain. The Great Britain, this political system also permits the religious leaders, representation of the religious leaders, especially in the House of Lords. These are, I think, the nine members are there from the different churches. Okay.
See, and thank you that you bring that up. That's also what Assad is saying. In a very different way, let's say, linked to Faisal Devji's point, how the various notions of the secular religious have a tremendous influence on all societies that we think are completely secular. No, and that's why he's pointing to what you just pointed out, the importance of the Anglican Church and the way the Anglican Church reworked the ideas of the Reformation. And he says there that British, the idea of this British state society wouldn't have happened without this Anglican Church, the influence of the Anglican Church. Right? See, Talal Assad is not engaging with the notion of the territory at all. Importance of the territory for the nation state. Whereas Devji's point is precisely about how you can conceive of a community or a nation where the territory is not important. And it's quite interesting. It's there in all religions. Think of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. What kind of a nation is that? Right? It's let's say an assembly of Hindus all over the world. So you have to think of how therefore the nation here is being conceived and how important is the territory there. That's the question. And both in Israel and there. Because it's not as if we don't have examples from here. More questions? Comments? Yes.
Ma'am, Ashish Nandi is also saying about how religion as faith differs from religion as ideology, and he's saying that in non-modern societies it was more religion as faith, where it was he's romanticizing this whole idea of religious tolerance. But what about the fact that throughout history we have seen religion being used as historically also as a force of power? Wasn't that like the Crusades or the
Absolutely.
fight between the clash of civilization between
Absolutely.
Islam and
Absolutely.
Christianity? Wasn't
Absolutely.
that ideological? Then how does
Absolutely.
this argument hold?
No, it doesn't work. That's why I'm saying. That's why Abhishek said that I disabused him of knowledge. It doesn't hold at all because, as I said, he is falling into periodizations
Yeah.
that do not work. He's falling into binaries again, kind of objectified, essentialized binaries that do not hold, and not just crusades and stuff. As I said, can we say that people even now who fall, think of religion as faith, who follow religion as faith, do not ever turn to religion as
Ideology.
ideology and are willing to also die for, some cause of, religious defense. Yes, thank you.
Same can be said about previous times. Like a lot of people were willing to die for religion and
Exactly.
ideology, and the same can be said today that many do believe in religious tolerance. There are communities, examples of communities who still practice religion and faith and do
Yes.
not have a very idea of religion and ideology.
Absolutely. 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 Thank you. Shalta, you want to say something? No? Okay. Thank you. Abhishek, how long do we break for? 10 minutes?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you. And the other important point Asad is making, Pratik, to come back to you. Oh my God. Yes. So I changed the Zizek core to the Balibar because I find him extremely important and interesting. He has a book, but he also has an article on the idea of how race is uh, integral to the concept of the nation in many ways. So look it up. It's very, very important. And how does race become so important to the idea of the nation? It's precisely through the idea of the indigenous, the native, the pure, the authentic. Okay, so the pure, the authentic, of the nation, actually, he says, constructs racisms of different kinds within any nation. And this, as I said, has very important implications for all societies. How do we come up with the idea of the pure or the authentic? And all along, as I said, we've been discussing how these constructions of the pure, the authentic, the native, the indigenous, which have tremendous validity in our actual social worlds, and yet they cause greater and greater problems and confusion. So Balibar, in that sense, is bringing together two notions that have become very important. The notion of course, the secularism, but that of cosmopolitanism, or we also speak of multiculturalism. So that's what he is trying to talk about. And as I said, that they go hand in hand with the different ways each nation state constructs frontiers through this idea of the authentic, the indigenous, the pure, the native, the true, in very different ways. Which is why I raised the question of who is there for the true citizen of India, who is the true citizen of America. Because there is the notion of that ideal citizen. Otherwise, you wouldn't say American Asians or Asian Americans. You see, there it's first your other identity and then American. And in India, it's the other way around. It's Indian Muslims, Indian Christians. But we don't use it for Indian Hindus. So again, we don't use it for the, let's say, the white American who is meant to be the ideal of citizenship. Right? So he's talking about that and dealing with notions of cosmopolitanism and secularism, which again he thinks are often used together. Just as we think that democracies are naturally secular or have to be secular, we also are now increasingly thinking that democracies are not just secular, they are also cosmopolitan or multicultural. And he's saying that actually, if we look at their interface, although he says the way they interfere with each other, the combination of cosmopolitanism and secularism is actually profoundly contradictory. And the two notions in the contemporary situation undermine, destruct, and deconstruct each other, the meaning of each other, thus putting the validity of their combination under question. Is it possible to think of religious cosmopolitanism? You see, the same kind of problems that all these people are dealing with in very different ways. If Assad is saying the moment we equate democracy and secular, we immediately assume that the religious can never be democratic. So again, he's saying now this new combination of secularism and cosmopolitanism also leads us to assume that there cannot be religious cosmopolitanism. And what would be the implications of a religious cosmopolitan for the secular? Think about it. Secular, as I said, again, if you go back to Taylor's point of look at the objectives and goals. Why, secular, when it came to acquire a positive meaning, it was not on account of the original institutional arrangement. It was on account of the goals which men thought were important, very important, which is respect, equality, giving everyone the equal right to be heard. And that's the kind of legitimacy that he's speaking of. That is how you show respect. So that's why, as I said, I find Balibar very interesting and not interesting, suggestive. Secularism and cosmopolitanism have become less and less separable. So we need to discuss each in terms of its interference, as I said, not just the interface, interference with the other. And here he refers to, again he is writing, remember all these things come up in what Vedas would say moments of crisis or events or moments or particular processes that throw up what we think settled notions of the state of the democracy of the society, in complete disarray. So what is the context of his writing? He's writing after the controversy over the veil in France, the hijab in France. Okay, and he is referring to Joan Scott's book, not the one that comes out after the controversy. He's referring to Joan Scott's book. Again, I find Joan Scott extremely important. And now people are saying Scott doesn't work because she's speaking of the biological difference of the sexes, and now we have transgender, this, that. But that doesn't mean that the important arguments she's making about gender being constitutive of social relations fall through. They don't. So he's referring to another very important book of Joan Scott, Only Paradoxes to Offer. And why is this book at least important for me? Because Scott is saying that if we look at the history of feminism, it's not a history of triumph. This idea of, one move from one step to another, constant triumph. Again, the other idea we have behind advancement is progress, which is a key concept of enlightenment, the progress, the constant march of humanity from one stage to a better stage. It's like to progress. History also is related to the idea of progress. So she's saying if you look at the history of feminism, it's not one of triumph, constant triumph at all. It's a history of full of paradoxes. To begin with, she says it has to start in a domain which is democratic and which had excluded women from its realm for a very, very long time. And that, when do women in France or England get the right to vote? So he's saying, and yet it had to begin there because there was no other, let's say, public space where they could, fight for. And the other paradox also is that later we have come to realize that it is a construct. The concept of the woman is a construct, and yet there's no way out if you're fighting for women's rights. So you have to construct this idea of the abstract category of universal woman. And see, as I said, how they have, we have learned from the problems with that universal construction and learned to, engage with, heterogeneity and difference and particularity of different kinds. Okay. So he's referring to Joan Scott's paradoxes to offer, which is why she's saying only paradoxes to offer. That the history of any struggle, any movement, anything is just a history of paradox. And paradox, she's using it in the sense of something that has no resolution ever, right? Hence paradox. So Balibar is referring to Scott's only paradoxes to offer because he says what he draws from this work is the intrinsic development of citizenship is also historical, which is why, remember, from the very beginning, I'm talking about what are our notions of the citizen. Again, the universal citizen. Can it be universal? It's not. So, for Balibar, the important point Scott is making in this book is that, that the development, the very process of development of notions of citizenship is extremely historical. And it's antinomic in character and has the capacity to generate internal contradictions and become self-destructive. Again, I can give examples from gender studies where women are saying that because of social conditioning, because of the linking of culture, tradition, the association of culture, tradition, and women as the bearers and repositories and careers of culture, tradition, and we didn't have time to read Newell Davis, in charge of the production and reproduction, biological reproduction also of not just of nation, but of culture, of tradition. The way, therefore, a woman is constituted as a citizen subject under a modern regime in any society is not the same as the way a man, let's say, if we believe in the the heterosexual norm, a man is constituted as a citizen subject. Why? It's not just that you're socializing and the way you grow up, your upbringing, everything is conditioned. It's also that the expectations from you as a citizen are very different. You see, which is why, as I said, and you can apply it to any other let's say differentiation we make, as I said, of citizenship, where the ideal, the constructed ideal, we take the constructed ideal as the norm, and anything else is deviation from that norm. Which is why more and more scholars are speaking of differential citizenship in all its senses, right? And that's what he's pointing to, that what the important lesson he draws from John Scott's work, this particular work, only by paradoxes to offer, is that citizenship is historically constructed, and not just that. If we pay attention to these processes of historical construction, it has so many internal contradictions that it can end up, kind of completely unsettling the notion of the citizen as universal. So, so it also, what does it then do? It therefore, also brings into tension our idea of the citizen in a democratic society as a necessary condition of a democratic society to function. It at least makes us reflect very critically as to what kind of citizen, and not just what kind of citizen, who is the ideal citizen, and what are our expectations of that, of that ideal citizen. And hence, this differential citizenship or internal contradictions within citizenship. So, citizenship has a necessary relation to processes of democratization. Yes, something I mentioned in the first. It has a necessary relationship to processes of democratization. Why? Because democratization in the sense of greater and greater inclusion, whom you include in this community of citizens and how, and yet it is not reducible to pure democracy. So it is intrinsically related to processes of democratization, but it does not itself per se can be equated with pure democracy. So cosmopolitanism and secularism are part of a project of democratization or democratizing, the accepted forms of democratic citizenship. That's it. Why is he speaking of cosmopolitanism and secularism together? He's saying that they are both a part of the project of democratizing the actual accepted norms of democracy. Accepted norms of democracy. So that's the democracy and democratic citizenship. So they're both part of that project of the accepted norms of democratic citizenship. A project that cannot be brushed aside. And as I said, he is writing immediately after that huge controversy over the hijab. So the questions therefore are, what are these accepted norms of democratizing and democratization of a society, any society? He is speaking obviously of the French society at that moment. So what are these accepted norms of democratizing citizenship? And again, we come back with the problem of laicity in the sense of its original movement or original institutional arrangement of insisting that, you do not admit of any kind of difference in public life. Remember, I had said that there can be two very different models of imagining a community, where you think of this abstract individual citizen as without any differentiation, as the citizens of this democratic state, which is a French model, and the Indian or many other models, where you think of heterogeneity or some form of communitarian element forming the basis of the wider, larger imagined community of the nation. Hence this, the problem of India with all its problems, but the problem of the hijab as something, be marking out the citizen as something different in a public institution, which is that of the school or the college, would not have, this particular problem would never have arisen in India in this way. Because mark of difference is accepted. And again, you cannot say which is good or which is bad. It's precisely through the problems you face in the working out of these ideas that you realize that, again, you cannot formulate judgments of this is good, this is bad, Indian model is good, that, French model is bad. No. So that's the question he's dealing with. The project that cannot be brushed aside, as I said, is how do notions of secularism and cosmopolitanism actually participate in the process of accepted norms of democratization. So then we have to question what is accepted where and how. So the controversy in France, therefore, revealed that laicity is not the equal right of religious denominations in the public realm at all. And hence, the French always say, no, we are very different from the secular. So laicity, in this sense, it revealed also the debate, the controversy revealed again that it's not the equal right of religious denominations in the public realm, but the separation of religion from the state and functions of the state, including education. But again, here it was a total refusal to acknowledge difference, because you insist on the notion of, that religion should not be, in any sense, or any mark of difference should not be allowed to invade what you think the public, the state, or anything, functions of the state. So, and he says that I cannot go into because I do not know the Hobbesian conception that well, but he's saying that this idea that of laicity, that is not the equal right of religious denominations in the public realm, but the separation of religious from the state and state functions, including education, can be traced, he thinks, to the Hobbesian notion of the social contract, much more than Locke's idea, which we have discussed with them in a little bit. But I leave it to you to look up the Hobbesian notion of the social contract. It does not represent, but at the same time, he's saying that this does not, laicity in this form, does not represent the only form of secularism, which we all know, on its or its mainstream realization. And again, we have to think of the case of India, the example that we have given. So, imposition of secular obedience on Muslim girls, we have to think of the practical implications of this. This idea of, nothing should be allowed, any mark of difference. So what is difference? You cannot construct the difference without constructing a notion of the ideal. That's why I'm going back again and again to who is the ideal citizen where. So any mark of difference, in the means, in this case, meant, and in many other cases meant that you impose a notion of secular obedience to conform to this norm. And the same can become true in a very different situation where the marks of difference are not that of, let's say, culture or religion, but a difference from the notion of the ideal, right? And again, you impose a very different kind of obedience if you believe in the idea, in a separate abstract morality of the state. And unfortunately, as I said, with very different models, we both believe that, there is a morality of the state or the nation state that stands above, which is not religious, but it can be an imposition and a coercion to conform to whatever we think is this morality of the state. So, therefore, imposition of secular obedience on Muslim girls, exact practical implications, we have to be the exact practical implications of this imposition of secular obedience need to be very carefully worked out. So again, he is speaking of Scott's Politics of the Veil, which comes out, as I said, 2007. She writes this book. I drew a different kind of conclusion from it, but he is right in pointing out that in any kind of polarization, any kind of polarization, when I said that that stops any kind of common dialogue, or common ground, what happens is you ask whose side are you on. We often say that. The moment if I say that I'm not secular, I'll be immediately taken to be, branded as in this current, chart situation. The same thing, whose side are you on? So in politics of the veil, for me, what Scott pointed out was that this insistence on not recognizing any marker of difference on the part of France to defend, laicity, which is the guarantor of, let's say, liberty and equality and fraternity, for her revealed that France is yet to come to terms with its colonial past. I mean, Maliba's agenda is different, but that's the important lesson I drew from that book, because she's stating it very forcefully. Because the notion of the difference still remains the difference of the earlier colonized, peoples who now very much form a part of France's citizenship, right? Citizens. So she's saying that this insistence that we do not recognize difference, which is, again, as I said, a very constructed notion of what is the ideal or the norm and what is different. Scott is saying that it reveals, even at this late stage, that France is yet to come to terms or deal, seriously, theoretically and practically with its colonial past, which I must say Britain has been forced to do for various other circumstances, reasons, in a very different way. But here, what Balibar is saying, that although he accepts Scott's position, what he sees a danger in her position is that she falls in the trap of the construction, the Orientalist construction of the indigenous, or the Muslim or the different woman in and her notion of modesty. Again, the kind of dilemma, as I said, the feminist activists faced with Shaban. What do? You push for uniform civil code when you can see, Pratik was asking me yesterday over tea, when you can see that there's coercion in this, imposition of a collective notion of moral or morality, right? That's the idea of the uniform civil code. You can see the problems with that, but you also see the problems of, objectifying and defending a collective in the name of recognizing or accepting heterogeneity, where you see the similar kind of coercion that the collective, this notion of the cultural collective, can exert on individual members of that collective. See, this is the dilemma. Again, there's no resolution, but it has to be handled with extreme care, extreme caution, extreme empathy, and the willingness to listen, right, and care, which we often lack because we are, immediately branding. This is parochial, this is national, this is fundamentalist, or this is good, this is bad. So that all these readings, and I have been talking about, this, thing, reflect before you pronounce, before you judge. Where are we coming from when we say this is good, this is bad? How, what gives us the power to make this moral or value judgments, right? Anyway, so he is saying that while he accepts Scott's position, but it's saying that we have to pay attention to the cultural logic of and the sense of modesty of the Muslim woman, which may be true. He's saying there is a slight danger of also constructing this, Muslim woman as different from the natural. So I'm saying that there is no resolution, and he is right there. But the more important point he makes from here is that we have a tendency to often collapse culture and religion. And that is the important point. And we should watch out before we do that. It's as if religion is almost always an integral part of culture, and it falls on women also to, as the bearers of the cultural tradition of any kind, any, nation, state, community that you can think of, there is a collapsing of the notions of culture and religion, and we have to then think of again the way cosmopolitanism and secularism can actually destruct and deconstruct each other. If we separate the two notions and bring them into a dialogue, again, culture and religion can do the same thing. And look at the interference of one, not just the interface, look at how one interferes with the other in different actual contexts. So in this polarized division of, we give right to the Muslim woman to, wear her veil because the Muslim sense of modesty. This is very important for you, Qureshi, from what you were saying. Because you are also socially conditioned to think that, yes, this is my modesty without questioning where this idea of the cultural modesty is coming from. So he's saying that the Muslim women, therefore, were caught between the language of two rival, and he calls both these languages phallocentric groups. So, yes, he's calling both these groups phallocentric groups, because the idea of modesty, that's why. Speaking the language of religion, tradition, and religious freedom, and the other, that of the secular, of education and the emancipation of women. And as I said, it's an extremely delicate issue. And the point is, do not pronounce your judgments out unless you have attended to these, details, these sensibilities with great care and great empathy. Right. Social worlds, as I say, are always messy and murky. There are no easy solutions. There are no easy resolutions. And the problem is, we construct or we believe in, classifications, categories for us to think, for us to be able to think, right? To organize our thoughts. But the problem is then we impose those concepts, categories on social worlds as if, they also function in social worlds in exactly the same ways as they function in our systems of thought. That's the very important gloss we have to be aware of constantly. So that's why he's saying that these were both phallocentric languages. One speaking the language of religion, tradition, and religious freedom, right? And the other speaking the language of the secular, education, and the emancipation of women. And Muslim women were caught in this, let's say, crossfire where, probably no one wanted to hear them or even understand where they're coming from. So and the other, why is he calling it phallocentric? He said because in both the target is the woman's body, absolutely. So woman's body, notions of modesty, even if you're speaking of notions of modesty, that's why what you were saying yesterday, be very think, reflect on this, this idea of the modesty, where does it come from, and covering yourself, why, how, from whom, etc. So I'm not saying that give it up completely, and I never would say the moment someone wears the veil, she's terribly parochial or she's no. But I'm saying we need to think also about the target is the woman's body and making them subject to their will to power and the reproduction through domination, right? The subjects to and subjects of. Again, yesterday I spoke of the modern subjects and the subjects of modernity in the sense of being subject to. So what he's pointing to that Muslim women then were subject to these very different languages, absolutely polarized languages, right? But they were subject to these discourses coming in a sense from outside that were pronouncing on their bodies. Okay. And both wanted, Muslim women to fall in line to their notion of the right, of the correct. So, now before I finish this, and as I said, the more important point he's making, as I said, is to separate culture and religion and be aware of the problems when we collapse them constantly. precisely, because it is a cultural, the argument that, it is about their modesty is being made in the name of their culture. So, separate culture and religion, and see their interference and bring the two together through a mediation of ideology or ideology, as he's been saying. That's a new point he's trying to introduce. So think of that. I mean, that is a very debatable point, as he says that why should we think of ideology as necessarily bad? Let's think that the two can be separated, brought into dialogue or tension with each other. Not just this, even secularism and cosmopolitanism through the mediation of some kind of ideology. Let's introduce ideology back into this mediation. As I said, this is a point that I haven't had time to even think through properly, but we need to pay serious attention to this point. So, whereas I said, of course, an ideology or ideology that is aware of the pitfalls and the problems. But that doesn't mean it is aware that when we bring multiculturalism or cosmopolitanism and secularism as obviously belonging together, we forget there's all these ways through which the culture is constituted. So multicultural. There are also very important works that questions this notion of the multicultural. It's the same way. One is the norm, and then deviation, difference you're recognizing, and also the idea that all of them exist as very separate, different entities, and then they come together. He's saying no. There are mutual implications. Okay, but that's a separate point. Another point I wanted to make, because he's speaking of Talal Assad's formulations again with relation to the secular. I'll just read this out. Another formulation which has quite different sources and intentions was put forward by Talal Assad in his essays, including some harsh critiques of French secularism on the genealogies of religion and the secular. Assad argues that religion is a purely Christian category used to impose the domination of the church over practices and creeds that by themselves are not religious. He adds, that is his reading of Assad. I don't absolutely agree with this, but I thought it is important since we have discussed Assad so much. This is page number 9. Okay, thank you. I've taken your computer, I'm sorry, but you can read it. Yes. And this is a purely, argues that religion is a purely Christian category used to impose the domination of the church over practices, creeds that by themselves are not religious. He adds that the dominant notions of secularism have inherited, should we say tautologically secularized, this theological notion. His argument ought to be taken very seriously, if only because it stresses the fact that there is no process of recognition without an institutional pattern of representation. Very, very important. Think of Charles Taylor. Now, there was an original institutional arrangement through which the separation could act, and we are insisting on this original institutional arrangement, which was extremely particular and specific, context specific, and have forgotten the common goals and purposes for which this institutional arrangement was made. And here, the Palibar is saying that we need to take Assad's arguments very seriously. He's looking for the common denominator, the minimum. For me, it has many other implications which I important. But I said, if only because it stresses the fact that there is no process of recognition without an institutional pattern of representation. Remember his connection of religion and power. He said they cannot stand without each other. Absolutely. So this how is the separation coming into force? Through an institutional process. And what is this institutional process? No institute, so there is no process of recognition without an institutional pattern of representation. And there is no representation without a code of representation. That's the second important point that he's making about Assad, which is either dominant or dominated. Remember, we can come back again to discipline, to obedience, through coercion, through which you make everyone conform. So the secular or the antithesis of the secular and the religious, an essential component of secularism that we have seen again and again, that the secular needs the religious, just as the modern needs the non-modern or the medieval, not just the non-modern, the medieval is very important for the modern to show that it's much better than the medieval. Yeah. Anyway, so the secular or the antithesis of the secular and the religious is one such code, the code of representation. A dominant code in certain Swiss societies where it is both institutionally organized and intellectually elaborated. In particular, through the discipline called history of religions. Very interesting point. Various parts of the world are now debating whether this discipline should be introduced in educational program. Okay, so then, and how do I go down? Sorry, just straight on. Yes, please. Sorry. But I wanted to read this out because I thought it was extremely important, the point he's making about, Talal Assad's. Okay. So the problem, as we know, comes from the fact that the code for the representation of the difference is not enunciated from outside, right? When you're constructing difference, it's from within something that you're constructing, the institution that you're constructing that is a difference. So the code for this representation is not enunciated from outside, from some absolutely universal or objective theoretical space. It is, of course, to more general democratic issues, objective. It is enunciated from within the conflict itself. Right? So, code of representation. Read the entire. I'm not reading out the entire passage, but I'm just picking out the important points. This problem should be related, of course, to more general democratic issues concerning representation. In the wake of Edward Zweig, we have discussed for some time the antithesis of being represented in a theoretical discourse. In the case of subalterns, are simply the people and representing oneself, therefore presenting oneself in a claim of emancipation that is not only juridical but also discursive and figurative. Okay. As this, we leave that aside for some time, and then we move to from there he jumps to the idea of the alternative conceptions of cosmopolitanism and also the cosmopolitan. Why alternative? Because besides everything, it is the institutional arrangement through which these codes, the work of separation is carried out, but it's also through which the code of representation is carried out. So if we take seriously the idea of alternative conceptions of cosmopolitanism, conceptions based on a deconstruction or internal critique of what has been institutionalized as secularism in the national framework and as an element of the nation's sovereignty, we will have to consider another problem, which is the problem of the code and the regime of translation in which the collective historical subjects represent themselves to one another and for one another, usually through the mediation of certain discourses and certain organic intellectuals. So this is how we should, and that is where what I was mentioning is bringing out the notion of the ideology through the mediation of ideology that is much more aware, that is much more empathetic, that is much more conscious, that is much more. I know it's not very easy, but am I making sense in a way? So this is why, at the end of the course, as I said, it's by, I changed. I mean, he suggested both, but I thought Balibar would be, a more fitting kind of conclusive lecture to the, to the readings we've been discussing and the issues we have been dealing with. I'll stop there. Now you can, any questions, clarifications, comments, observations, please, not just in today's readings, in general. I don't know if I am leaving you with some idea of why, we began with a questioning of, propositions, categories, concepts that we think have universal applicability, and also, but more importantly, the way we can try at least to begin to rethink and reconsider them without dismissing them completely. engaging with their ends and purposes is very, very important. So I'll stop there. Comments, observations, questions, criticism. You can take your computer back. So that we don't read this. Thank you. No? Nothing? No one? That's true. Money? No? Kureshi, Gayatri? No? Okay. Thank you then. Thank you very much. Hope I have enjoyed, I don't know if you have. I hope you got something out of the discussions and readings and things like this. Yes. Thank you. So we'll meet for the valedictory session. And, we have to wait for Abhishek's phone call to somebody to show me to probably for the time.
For the validity.
Yes, because there's someone else meant to come, probably the dean or the head or someone. So it doesn't depend entirely on us. We've changed the time, but he has to check with them if they are available. Okay. But the ones who want to speak, please, just don't hold them. Thank you.